In the middle of a snowstorm, 3 girls stood trembling at a stranger's door. "Our mama died this morning. We have nowhere else to go." The farmer looked at them, burdened by an old promise, and uttered the words that would change everything. "Then you're home now. If this moment gave you chills like it did for me, don't forget to leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories that hit right in the heart. And stick around, what happens next will surprise you even more." That morning, blanketed in white, the stillness of the plains broke with a soft knock at the door, followed by words cold enough to chill the fire itself. "Our mama died this morning. We don't have anywhere else to go." John looked up, and what he saw weren't strangers, but shattered reflections of a past he thought long buried. "Then you're home now," he muttered, before realizing he'd said it in the singular, as if that pain-worn plural hadn't meant all 3 girls. Wind swept pale flakes like ghostly ash around the porch. John's boots creaked against the wood as he stepped outside to help them. There were 3 of them. The oldest lips cracked and eyes steady despite the shivers held the smallest one's hand, who clung tightly to a rag doll missing one eye. Between them stood a girl with dark hair tied haphazardly with a frayed ribbon, staring at the man with a look caught between fear and defiance. They wore threadbare dresses, soaked cloaks, and carried the scent of distant smoke, like they'd walked through an invisible fire. "Come on in," John said, stepping aside. The warmth from the stove reached them like a long-lost embrace. If there were a narrator whispering in the back of one's mind, he'd probably say John was a man with calloused hands and a patched-up heart. And he wouldn't be wrong. Years of tilling stubborn soil and burying unspoken memories had made him short with people and tender only with animals. It had been 5 winters since his wife Claire died, giving birth to a baby boy who barely drew breath. Since then, the house had survived on the sound of his own footsteps and the occasional murmur of a radio he turned on just to keep from thinking too much. The oldest girl spoke up first. "I'm Emma. That's Lucy, and the little one is Rose." She motioned with her chin to a damp bundle tucked beneath her arm. "Mama said to give this to you if anything ever happened." John glanced at the cloth-wrapped package. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for it. The stitching was done in blue thread, just like the kind Claire used. A sharp chill crept down his spine. "What was your mama's name?" he asked, still not opening the bundle. Madeline, Emma said softly, the name falling like a quiet blade. Madeline. It landed on the table like a full glass no one dared to pick up. John knew that name. He'd once whispered it by the river under the moonlight when promises came easier than keeping them. Madeline had been Claire's friend when they were young, and long before that she was almost the woman John chose back when he didn't yet know what he wanted. He hadn't seen her since the day she wished him happiness with teary eyes as he stood beside Claire. And now her name had returned, carried on snow-covered feet, in the form of 3 motherless girls. John fumbled with the package, untying it with stiff fingers. Inside was a folded letter bound with a worn ribbon and a silver locket engraved with a flower. The letter smelled like smoke and dried sorrow. Before opening it, he looked at the girls. "First, get those wet clothes off. There are clean blankets in the back room. After that, you'll eat something warm." Emma hesitated, but the resolve in John's eyes convinced her. As they disappeared down the hallway, he leaned against the table and finally unfolded the letter. "John." It began no greetings, as if they'd last spoken only yesterday. "If you're reading this, it means my voice is gone. I didn't make it to the clinic and there wasn't time to find anyone else. I'm trusting the promise I heard you make beside Claire's grave that you'd offer shelter to someone in need. My daughters have no one else, and there's something more I need to tell you. Lucy is your daughter." The paper quivered in John's grasp. The world went silent save for the crackle of the fire and the distant giggle of Rose discovering a blanket softer than snow. A knowing narrator might say the past is a wild horse, it comes thundering back when you least expect it. John sat down, frozen in place. "My daughter," he whispered, barely making a sound. The rest of the letter gave specific instructions. "Don't trust Ezekiel Ward. He's got documents he's planning to use. If he shows up, tell him he's got no claim. The locket is the proof. There's a photo inside. John, I'm sorry for the weight I leave behind, but your home was the only place I ever pictured as safe for them." He pried open the locket with a fingernail and found a tiny photograph carefully trimmed. It showed Madeline holding a baby with dark curls. On the back, a date and the initial J. The soft afternoon light spilled through the window and glinted off the metal. John felt a strange mix of pride and dread swell inside. He tucked the letter into the inside pocket of his jacket. It wasn't time to fall apart. The girls came back wearing dry clothes, John's oversized shirts and makeshift skirts fashioned from old sheets. Rose sucked her thumb, drowsy. Lucy, her ribbon now drooping, glanced at him with eyes that held more questions than accusations. "Who are you, really?" they seemed to ask without speaking. He made a soup from leftover chicken and cornmeal, served it in steaming bowls. "Eat slow. There's more." Rose blew on hers seriously. Emma kept an eye on her sisters while John tried to appear unfazed. "Where were you living?" he asked in a flat tone. "2 days north near the Black Mountains," Emma replied. "Mama always said not to go into town. We had an old cabin, but last night, we couldn't stay there anymore." Her eyes clouded over. John didn't press. He understood. They had run from something, or someone. Maybe fear itself. The name Ezekiel Ward thudded in his brain. Ward was the kind of man who bought land, like other folks bought chewing tobacco quick and without second thought. A land baron in silk shirts while everyone else wore canvas. He'd tried to buy John's ranch twice, got turned down twice. "You'll sleep here tonight," John said. "We'll figure the rest out tomorrow." He wasn't offering. He was deciding. Still, he knew the town would buzz with whispers. A man alone taking in 3 girls, one of whom had eyes that mirrored his own. He'd have to tread carefully. The dawn broke over the plains in a streak of soft pink slicing through snow. John woke earlier than usual, not to milk cows, but to piece together a plan. The letter in his coat pocket felt heavier than a gun. He hadn't shown it to anyone, not even Emma. He didn't know how or when to say it. Lucy was up too. He found her sitting by the cold fireplace, clutching the ragged doll. "How did your mama die?" he asked bluntly. Lucy dropped her gaze. She coughed up blood. She couldn't breathe. Emma had said she needed to go find help, but Mom insisted we stay together. She said, "Find John Miller. He'll know what to do." And then she stopped responding. The rag doll lost a thread under her fingers. John felt a lump in his throat as he looked at the dark hair of the promise Lucy spoke, as though repeating something she'd heard 1,000 times. Mom always said if everything falls apart, find the man who once vowed to protect those with no one else. John turned his gaze away. Even in her absence, Madeline had left him a duty that burned in his chest. The rhythm of life on the ranch shifted in the days that followed. 3 sets of small hands learned to gather eggs, feed the chickens, and heat water for baths. Rose laughed while chasing a stubborn rooster around the yard. Emma tried to carry herself with the calm of someone forced to be a mother at 14. Lucy, always watching, studied John's every move like she was trying to figure him out, and he found himself explaining things he usually did in silence: how to sharpen a spade, how to read the sky for signs of a storm, or just a harmless winter show, how to listen to the horses at night to sense if something or someone was lurking. In the afternoons, when the sun climbed timidly over the hills, he'd tell them stories from his childhood, not because they needed to hear them, but because he feared sitting alone with his own thoughts. On the third day, someone showed up on the road. The smoke from the chimney must have given away that the house was no longer empty. It was Silas the shepherd, who lived half a mile down. He came in his rickety wagon, his usual smile freezing the moment he spotted the girls. "John," he said, "folks in town are saying you took in some strays the night it snowed. Ward sent word asking if you needed help, or if you were thinking of selling." That last word left a bitter taste in the air. John clenched his fist behind the door. "Tell Ward I don't need a damn thing from him, and nothing under this roof is for sale." Silas raised his hands. "Don't shoot the messenger, man. Just saying what I heard. Some think those girls are trouble, that the oldest is the daughter of a woman who owed Ward money." John let the silence speak for him. "Silas, watch yourself, and don't come back here with gossip." After the wagon faded into the distance, Emma stepped closer. "Who's Ward?" she asked softly. "A man who thinks anything not his can be, if he's got paper or fear on his side," John replied. "But if no one signed anything, he's got no claim here." But Emma pressed her lips together. Mom owed him money, she admitted suddenly, like confessing a sin that wasn't hers to bear. She bought medicine and food from his store last winter when she got sick. Said she'd pay with work, but he wanted something else. John felt something crack inside. "As long as I breathe, no one's laying a hand on you." The kind of promise that if a narrator could trace threads, would be seen as the seed of a storm. That afternoon, John took Emma out to the barn. Beneath a hidden compartment, no one in the valley remembered he kept his savings coins wrapped in cloth tucked among sacks of grain. "This is what I've got," he said, showing her the small stash. "It's not much, but it'll be enough to keep Ward off. If he shows up, I pay him, then send him packing." "No one's saying you stayed here because of a debt." Emma's eyes widened. "It's not fair. You shouldn't have to. Fair would be your mother still being alive." John cut her off. "This is what can be done." Midway through winter, when the days were still short, but the riverbanks began to thaw, something happened that turned the whole game around. It was a sharp blue afternoon, the kind where the sky looks polished like glass. Lucy, curious as always, had climbed up to the attic where John kept old boxes. Between rags and tools, she found a small trunk engraved with initials C.H. Clara Miller. She opened it quietly. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. Clara's diary. John, Lucy shouted from above, "Can I read this?" He rushed up the stairs two at a time, startled. The moment he saw his late wife's name on the cover, something inside him shook. He moved to snatch the journal from her hands, but the look in Lucy's eyes stopped him. He opened to a random page. Clara's handwriting flowed neatly with a date, April 15th, 5 months before she died. Today, Madeline came by. She had Lucy in her arms, asked me to care for her if anything happened. I promised her John would do it. I told her I know more about their past than he thinks, and I don't blame him for any of it. Love's like the wind. You can't see it, but it moves everything it touches. I gave her the blue thread for the letter. I don't know how much time I have left, but I want John to live without more secrets. Someday, if God wills it, he'll know the truth." John collapsed onto the wooden floor, leaning against a beam. Lucy, still holding the journal, looked at him as if seeing him for the first time, vulnerable, real. Emma came running up, alarmed by the shouting, and then the truth, long buried, came pouring out like a flood. John took a breath. "There are things you need to hear. Your mother and I, years ago, before I married Clara, we loved each other. Then life took us in different directions, but she came back when you, Lucy, were just a baby. She asked for help, and I didn't understand what she really needed. And now," his voice faltered. Emma clenched her fists. "Are you saying Lucy—" "Yes," John admitted, eyes lowered. "She's my daughter." Silence settled like a heavy curtain. Rose didn't understand. She was playing with the lamp cord. Lucy held the journal like a shield. Her eyes welled up, but no tears fell. "Why weren't you with us then?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. John swallowed the guilt like a mouthful of ash. "Because I was a coward. Because I married Clara, and I thought doing the right thing meant not looking back. Because I thought helping from afar was enough. And it wasn't. I'm sorry." Lucy looked at Emma, whose expression had hardened into the kind worn by someone making decisions for everyone. "That doesn't change the fact that you took care of us now," Emma said slowly. "But it does mean we're not just a burden. One of us is your blood, and the others, what are you going to love us less?" John shook his head firmly. "Rose and Emma are part of this family. They became part of it the second they walked through that door. The kind of narrator who understands how stories work would tell you this kind of revelation isn't an ending. It's a spark." Emma tucked the journal under her arm. "We're not telling anyone. Ward could use this somehow." John nodded. "For now it stays between us. But someday each of you will deserve to know exactly where you belong." They came down from the attic carrying a shared burden that oddly enough brought them closer together. In the following weeks, Ward's presence hovered like a shadow over everything. Twice they spotted him from a distance riding his black horse with two of his foremen flanking him. He'd pass slowly in front of the ranch without stopping, eyes sweeping the property like he was sizing it up. News from town came via Silas. Ward had bought out the general store and now had control over almost all the food shipments coming in from the railroad. Rumors also spread that he'd found some documents inside the abandoned cabin where Madeline used to live, papers that supposedly mentioned an outstanding debt. One afternoon, when the snow had turned to slush and the mud clung heavy to their boots, Ward showed up on the porch. He didn't knock. He walked right in like he owned the place, wearing a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat that cast shadows over his eyes. "Miller," he said, flashing a grin full of two white teeth. "I've come to settle an old account." John stepped between him and the girls. Emma huddled close to Lucy and Rose. "No one here owes you a damn thing," John said firmly. Ward pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This says otherwise. Madeline promised repayment through labor or goods. Since she's no longer around to work it off, her girls were left in her place. 3 strong hands, useful mouths. They could spin yarn, clean, do whatever." His words trailed off when John took a step forward. A careful narrator wouldn't describe what came next in detail, but John's eyes alone could have fired bullets. "Take one more step and you'll leave this place without teeth," he said, low and deadly. Ward laughed, but it rang hollow. "I don't have to lay a hand on you to ruin you. You know how this works. A signature, a whisper, and suddenly the sheriff's looking at you sideways. A few words in the wrong ears, and Father Graham stops blessing your door. But I'm a practical man. Pay me what the late woman owed, and I'll disappear like spring thaw. John threw the small stack of coins he had on the table. That's everything. Take it and get out. Ward counted it, made a show of disappointment. Not enough. But I'll strike a deal. I've got my eye on your land. Sell me the northern stretch, sign it over, and we'll call it even. The girls stay with you. For now. What do you say? From the corner. Emma clutched the locket tighter in her hand. She knew it, and the photo inside were proof of something, though she hadn't yet worked out what. John shook his head. I'm not selling a damn thing. Ward's eyes turned cold. Then we'll be seeing each other again real soon. He walked out, leaving muddy footprints on the clean floorboards. That night, John realized waiting around was no longer an option. He took out Madeline's letter and the locket, showing them to Emma. This proves Lucy is my daughter. Ward has no legal right to her, and the others, they're her sisters. I won't let them go either. But if he comes back with more papers, we'll need more than words. Emma furrowed her brow. Mom kept something hidden beneath the floorboards at the cabin. I saw her once when she thought we were sleeping. Maybe there's more there, something that can prove she didn't owe what he claims. John looked at her surprised. Can you take me there? At first light, she nodded. They set off before the sun reached the treetops, leaving Lucy and Rose in Silas's care. He swore to protect them with his life if needed. Madeline's old cabin stood, or more accurately sagged, among leafless trees, its roof buckled under snow. The silence there was heavier than anywhere else. Emma pointed to a loose board behind the stove. John pried it up with his knife. Beneath was a leather-wrapped bundle. Inside, a ledger with names, amounts, and a chilling note. Ezekiel Ward charges me 3 times what things cost. He won't give receipts. Says his word is enough. If I die, let this be known. M. There were also letters from other farmers with similar complaints, and a deed for a small plot of land by the river registered in Madeline's name, which Ward clearly ignored. Proof. For the first time in days, Emma cracked a smile. Their journey back was slower. A gray cloud moved in from the west. Halfway home, a gunshot split the air. Bark exploded from a nearby tree. John shoved Emma into a ditch just as 2 riders appeared, Ward's men. Boss said you're not supposed to be snooping around. One yelled, rifle raised. John rarely carried a weapon, but this time he brought along the old shotgun Clara had once kept for coyotes. He didn't mean to hurt anyone, just send a message. 2 shots into the sky were enough to make them hesitate. Emma, fast and fearless, hurled a rock that struck one man square in the forehead. Chaos followed, brief, loud, muddy. A spooked horse reared. Shouts and panic blurred together. No blood spilled, just bruises, fear, and the sting of close danger. They made it out by cutting through a brush path, the leather bundle pressed tight to John's chest. They reached the ranch by sundown, exhausted. Silas, pale-faced, told them Ward had already come by twice looking for them. Lucy and Rose were fine but clearly worried. John pulled Emma into the kitchen and laid out the documents on the table. This is enough to show everyone that Ward is scamming the entire valley. Father Graham may not be a judge, but people listen to him. And Fernandez, the man who runs the telegraph, he's been cheated too. If we rally the community... Emma gave him a look. You said you didn't want... I don't want courts or jail time, John interrupted. But I do want the town to see Ward for what he is. Sometimes justice comes from being shunned from public shame. If Ward loses respect, he loses power. Emma nodded. but Ward knew how to play that game too. The very next morning, he pinned a notice on the general store's board accusing John of kidnapping and hiding the girls to gain control of their inheritance. The rumor spread through town like wildfire across dry grass. Some of the townsfolk glanced sideways at John when he came in for salt and flour. Others whispered. He was always strange, and now with 3 little girls under his roof. The tension hung in the air like a storm everyone could feel coming, but no one dared to name. John quietly gathered Silas Fernandez and Dorothy, the school teacher, who knew her way around letters better than anyone, and laid out Madeline's documents. Dorothy, with steady conviction, said, "This proves Ward used his store to trap people in debt. If we reveal this during Sunday service when everyone's gathered, he won't be able to bury it." Fernandez added, "I can send a copy to Dry Creek. The newspaper there will print it." John clenched his jaw. Ward won't sit still. He'll come here first. He wants what he thinks is his, and he believes he can take it. That night, the snow came back hard. The windows trembled under the howling wind. John didn't sleep a wink, listening for every creak like it was a stranger's step. Around midnight, the dogs started barking like mad. A scent of smoke, one that didn't belong to the stove, seeped through the doorframe. The barn. John bolted outside, throwing on his coat as he ran. Flames were already licking the barn's roof, dancing orange tongues across the wooden beams. The horses cried out in panic. "Emma, water!" he yelled. Lucy and Rose woke up with a start. The fire wasn't an accident. Nearby crosses of hay soaked in kerosene burned like torches. Someone had lit it on purpose. Silas came running with buckets, Dorothy with a blanket, Fernandez with a sack. They fought the blaze with everything they had. John managed to get the stable doors open, setting the terrified animals free. Smoke scorched his eyes. Emma, covered in soot, dragged bucket after bucket. Lucy struggled to pull a grain sack too heavy for her, and John yanked her away just in time. Rose sobbed, terrified, in Dorothy's arms. When the last flame died, the barn was a charred skeleton. Above the wreckage, the stars shone cruelly. Nailed to the scorched doorway with a knife was a note. John ripped it free. "Last chance. Tomorrow at dawn. Elm Hill. Bring the papers and the girls, or everything burns. No signature, just Ward's black mark." John shivered, but not from the cold. The narrator knows that kind of tremble. It's the kind that comes when a man realizes he can't run and there's no room left to bargain. He turned to Emma, Lucy, and Rose, their faces smudged with smoke and fear, their eyes wide and red. "This isn't just about you anymore. This is about the whole valley. But first, I'll keep you safe." He packed the documents into a leather pouch and slung it around his neck. He loaded the shotgun. "At sunrise, I'm going to that hill, but I'm not handing over anything, and I'm not bringing you with me." Emma stepped forward. "You're not going alone." John was about to argue, but he saw Madeline's strength in Emma's eyes and in Lucy the same stubbornness he saw in the mirror. Half asleep, Rose whispered, "Don't leave us." The sky turned a faint purple as they mounted up. Silas insisted on riding with them. Dorothy, a rosary tucked into her pocket, came too. Elm Hill was an old place where cowboys once settled scores with sharp words, because the kind settled with bullets usually ended in funerals. The bare elm stood like a finger pointing to the heavens. Ward was already there, flanked by 6 men. He smiled when he saw them. "Well, well, you came, and brought an audience. Even better." John stood firm, the leather pouch pressed tight to his chest. "Here are the papers, but they're not for you. They're for everyone." His voice rang out in a way no one had ever heard before. Ward's been cheating this valley. Madeline died in debt because he charged 3 times what things cost. Here's her ledger letters from others' proof. Today at church, this all comes out. If you want to stop it, you'll have to silence all of us, and that you won't manage. Ward clicked his tongue. I figured that woman kept something hidden. Should have burned that whole cabin. One of his men stepped forward, hand near his pistol. Silas raised his shotgun. Nobody fires. Not today, said Dorothy, strangely calm. There'll be no blood here, but there will be truth. Ward's eyes settled on Lucy, who peeked out from behind John. That girl belongs to me. Debt gives me that right. John felt a fire rising in his chest. That girl is mine by blood. Ward blinked, thrown off. What John didn't flinch. Yes, she's my daughter, and the other 2 are my daughters by choice. Try taking one of them, and the entire town will stand in your way. Just then, people began climbing the hill, dozens of them. The churchgoers led by Father Graham. Fernandez had spread the word. They gathered under the elm. Father Graham, who rarely stepped into earthly matters, raised his hand. I read those papers this morning, and I'll say this. Anyone who gets rich by scamming the poor in winter doesn't deserve a greeting in the street or bread at the table. If Ward won't make this right, then he should leave this valley. Ward found himself surrounded not by weapons, but by stares of disapproval, by whispers of names and numbers passed from mouth to mouth. You're all insane, he shouted. Paper means nothing if I don't acknowledge it. It's not the paper, Dorothy replied. It's the truth. His men, sensing the crowd's shift, began to fall back. No one wanted to be on the wrong side of the whole town. Ward climbed onto his horse, seething. This isn't over, Miller. You'll pay for this. He rode off into the mist, his men following. The sun finally broke through. John dropped to his knees, drained. Lucy wrapped her arms around his back. Emma exhaled the breath she'd been holding since the fire. Rose in Silas's arms smiled at the beam of light pushing through the clouds. Peace, however, was only a pause. The narrator knows this, and so does the reader. The fire that destroyed the barn wasn't just revenge, it was a warning. A wounded Ward would find other ways to strike back. And in a valley where law was more handshake than statute, the final chapter was still unwritten. John stood, tucked the documents, now shields, back into his coat, and looked at the girls. Let's go home, John said, and the word home meant far more than the charred remains of 4 barn walls. It was a promise, an anchor, a beginning. As they made their way down the hill, a figure watched from behind a rock hat, pulled low, hand wrapped in a bandage. One of Ward's men had found something else at Madeline's old cabin, something John didn't yet know. A name scribbled on a torn scrap of notebook paper. It wasn't Ward's name, but that of someone with far more power. A man capable of claiming not just debts, but lives. The story hadn't ended. It had only just flipped over its most dangerous card. The dawn that followed the standoff at Elm Hill didn't bring relief, only a thin and brittle calm like glass moments before it shatters. Copper Creek had watched Ward retreat, but men who see themselves as owners of everything rarely accept no as the final word. John knew this as he stepped over the damp ashes of his barn. Every blackened plank reminded him that even the strongest homes can still be broken. The girls were fast asleep in the big bedroom, worn out from a night of fire and fear. Outside, Silas and Fernandez hammered new boards into place. Dorothy was in the kitchen baking bread for everyone, and Father Graham, his robe still smudged with soot, murmured prayers more for courage than for miracles. The narrator, breathing in step with the characters, notices that John didn't cry in front of anyone. He saved his tears for the shadows of the half-collapsed stable. There, among the lingering scent of smoke and horses, he leaned his forehead against a beam and let the grief pour out, tangled with fury. And then, like men hardened by the plains but not turned to stone, he wiped his face with the back of his hand and went back to work. There was rebuilding to do, but more than that, there were loose ends to tie documents, to organize truths, to uncover. The leather pouch with Madeline's papers rested under his shirt, like a second heartbeat. At that very hour, not far away, in a house with tall walls and rugs that cost more than a month's labor, Ward was visited by a man he usually didn't let anyone else even know existed. The shadowy figure who had watched from the rocks now spoke to him in hushed tones, holding out a scorched piece of paper he'd recovered from the wreckage at Madeline's place. A name half-burned but legible. Hallie N. Ward scowled. The narrator who knows the weight of a name also knows that Walter Hallen was the real power behind Ward's borrowed money, a cattle broker who financed loans with blood-soaked interest. For years, Ward had just been the dog with someone else's teeth, and now his master wanted results. Hallen needed John's land because beneath it ran a buried stream that could be diverted to feed his cattle herds along the railway line. It wasn't just about pride, it was about water. And in the West, water is power. John didn't know about the stream yet, but he could feel in his bones that there was something larger behind Ward's threats. As he nailed fresh boards into place, his thoughts drifted to the attic and Clara's old journals. That afternoon, with the sun beginning to sink, he asked Emma and Lucy to stay with Dorothy and climbed up alone, lamp in hand. He opened the leather covers like someone unlocking a chest that might heal or cut deep. Among baking recipes, planting notes, and late-night confessions, he found a loose page written in Clara's shaky script. If John is reading this, it means the past has come knocking again. Madeline and I made a pact she would trust my home if something happened to her, and I would trust that he would do what's right. But there's another truth. Emma wasn't born to Madeline. She was left on her doorstep one early morning, wrapped in a nameless blanket. Who left her, I don't know, but Madeline loved her like her own, and so did I. If the day ever comes, don't let anyone tell her she's worth less because of blood. Love John has more last names than bloodlines. The paper quivered under the lamplight. An unexpected turn had quietly sliced the story in half. Emma, the eldest, wasn't Madeline's daughter by birth, but she was the one who carried the strength of a mother. John lowered the journal carefully. His mind snapped back to Ward's words. 3 strong bodies. Collateral. If Ward found out, he'd use Emma as leverage, claiming no one had a right to stop him. The narrator recognizes this quiet threat. In lands where paper means more than bonds of heart, legal orphans become pawns. That same night, John decided to speak. He gathered the girls around the fire. The warmth brought color back to their cheeks. Rose traced the shape of her fingers on the wall. Lucy, ever watchful, looked to John with a quiet intensity. Emma, sitting straight-backed, held a cup of tea Dorothy had sweetened with honey. John took a breath. "I found another letter," he said. The names no longer hurt to speak. They were now part of his flesh. She knew far more than I realized. She says. He turned to Emma. "You arriving in Madeline's arms was a miracle without a story. You weren't born to her, but she chose you. And I choose you too, if you'll let me. No one here is worth more or less because of blood. This house is yours by choice, not by duty." Emma stared at him. Her usually guarded face softened just slightly. "Are you saying I might not even have a last name?" she asked, and the question hung heavier than it seemed. "You can have any name you want," John replied. "If you stay, you can take mine. If you want to keep Madeline's, that's honorable too. But if Ward finds out about this, it could be dangerous. So for now, it's our secret." Lucy reached over and took Emma's hand. "You're my sister. Doesn't matter how. We say so." Rose, not fully understanding but feeling the moment, hugged Emma's leg. The narrator lets the moment breathe. Family isn't built on birth records. It's stitched together through small, repeated acts of care. The danger made itself known the very next day. Pushed by Hallin's growing impatience, Ward tried a quick strike. While John and Silas were out fixing the northern fence, two men stormed the house expecting to find the girls alone. Dorothy, who had just dropped by to bring bread, met them head-on with a broomstick like it was a sword. "You don't come in here without knocking," she shouted, and the dogs, who always knew the scent of trouble, leapt first. There was no blood, but plenty of shoving, cursing, and chaos. By the time John got back, the men were fleeing boots, torn hands over their heads, teeth marks on their heels. Dorothy was shaking, but her voice didn't waver. "If we hadn't been here, they'd have taken them. You need to move the girls." John knew then his home wasn't enough anymore. That night, he gathered the neighbors who had proven their loyalty. Fernandez, Dorothy, Silas, and 3 other farmers came together and devised a plan to keep watch in shifts, temporarily hiding the girls in different homes and creating a kind of social perimeter. There wasn't a sheriff they could trust, but there were more than enough watchful eyes to catch anything out of place. In addition, Fernandez sent Madeline's documents by telegram to a friend in Dry Creek, who promised to publish an exposé exposing Ward and Hallin. The narrator, observing from above, sees the threads connecting what was once a scattered town had started to weave itself into unity against a common enemy. But cornered and desperate Ward played his last real card, Hallin. The cattle broker arrived in the valley a week later in a covered carriage dressed in a silk vest with a gold pocket watch. His tone was smooth, his words polite, but his eyes carried the weight of wealth. He headed straight to Ward's ranch, where the stench of failure lingered in the air. "You promised me land and water," Hallin said calmly. "All I see are enemies and fire. I didn't come for excuses." Desperate Ward pointed to a map laid out on the table. "There's a stream beneath Miller's land. If we dig a trench to divert it, we can irrigate your pastures. We just need to get them off the land. I've got papers, there's a debt." Hallin smiled as if humoring a child. "It's too late. The people already know. If I take anything by force now, I'll be branded a thief. I prefer to buy. Find his weak spot. That girl Lucy is his daughter." Ward blurted it out, lacing his voice with poison. Hallin raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly does that help you?" Ward realized too late. He'd just handed over a weapon that didn't belong to him. Hallin, cold and calculating, mused aloud. "So he won't sell? Fine. Everyone has a crack in their armor. Find his. If you don't, you'll lose every cent I ever gave you, and you know I'll crush you for it." Ward swallowed hard. In an instant, pride turned to panic. Meanwhile, John chose not to wait for the Dry Creek article to ripple through the town. He brought the girls to the old schoolhouse closed for the season, where Dorothy tucked them away in the basement between dusty desks and chalkboards. Silas and Fernandez took turns standing guard. After much thought, John paid a visit to Father Graham. "I need more than just kind words," he said. "I need everyone to swear on their own conscience that they won't give in to fear, that they won't open their doors if Ward comes offering favors he can't afford." The priest, who was not one for earthly oaths, understood that this time faith had to serve survival. On Sunday during the sermon, he spoke not of sins or guilt, but of community. If you see injustice and do nothing, you are complicit. If you remain silent while the powerful trample the weak, your silence will outlive you. I say this as a man and a servant of God. No one in this valley shall be sold for a dirty piece of paper. The narrator attuned to the murmur that rose like smoke through the chapel rafters. Notes something shifted in Copper Creek that day. For the first time in years, we meant something. That night took a turn when Emma, hidden in the school's basement, heard a creak she didn't recognize. She thought it might have been Silas changing shifts, but the figure that descended the steps was younger, thinner. "Don't be scared," whispered a boy with pale eyes. "My name's Elias. I used to work for Ward. I don't want them to get hurt." The son of one of Ward's foremen. Elias had overheard enough threats to know what was coming. He was around Emma's age, maybe a year older, and trembled like a leaf in the wind. "They're coming before sunrise. Hallen says if they take one, Miller will cave. They're going for the middle girl, Lucy. Ward thinks she's the weak link." Emma shot upright like a spring. "You're not going to let that happen," Elias said. "That's why I came. You need to get out before they arrive." His words were the first sliver of light at the end of a long tunnel. Emma, who didn't trust easily, saw something honest in his face. "Thank you. But you can't stay. If they find you here, they'll make you pay for it." Elias nodded and slipped away just as quietly as he'd come, leaving a thread of hope behind. Emma didn't wait for daylight. She woke Lucy and Rose and roused Dorothy, who was sleeping on a cot nearby. "We have to go now," she whispered. John was still back at the ranch. There wasn't time to warn him. They decided to use the school's old tunnel, a narrow underground passage the kids once used to play cowboys and outlaws that led out toward the dry creek bed. Dorothy lifted Rose into her arms. Emma grabbed Lucy's hand. The night smelled like damp earth and danger. The narrator knows fate likes to play its hand without warning. Outside, Silas's shift had just ended, and Fernandez hadn't arrived yet. Ward's men moved early, guided by the scout who'd been watching the school. As Emma opened the trap door toward the creek, two silhouettes blocked the moonlight. "There they are," one of them barked. Lucy, holding tight to Rose, scanned frantically for cover. Emma acted fast. "We split up. If they chase all of us, we're done. I'll draw them away." Lucy opened her mouth to protest, but there was no time. Emma darted out the cold, slashing her face, crashing through the brush on purpose to make noise. The men gave chase. John arrived just in time to see two figures running after a third. He understood instantly Emma was bait. He sprinted after them, heart pounding in his throat. One of the men raised a rifle. The shot cracked the night open, but the narrator won't describe what lead does to flesh. The noise alone was enough to alert the valley. John tackled the man to the ground, knocking the wind out of him. The second one, spotting Silas and Fernandez approaching in the distance, bolted without looking back. Emma ducked behind a fallen log, her breath wild and ragged. John pulled her into his arms without asking. "Don't ever do something like that alone again," he whispered, voice breaking. She didn't answer with words, just tears she tried to hide. She had made up her mind there was no way they were taking Lucy. Ward's plan had failed, but Hallen wasn't the kind to stop just because something didn't go his way. The very next morning, a letter arrived at the ranch delivered by a messenger from Dry Creek. The newspaper had published the story. Swindler of the Plains, Ward exploits widows and the sick. Hallen read the article with quiet rage. He couldn't afford for his name to be dragged into scandal. He decided to sever ties with Ward and leave the area, but not before making one last move. He sent an agent to make a direct offer to John for the land, no threats, just money. He believed every man had a price. But the narrator knows that John had already paid his with promises and tears. The emissary arrived, polite hat in hand. He offered crisp bills, a clean contract, and an easy way out. John could move south, buy a smaller ranch, raise the girls far away from trouble. "All we want is the northern strip," the man said. John poured him coffee and listened in silence. Then he pointed out toward the still blackened remains of the barn. "You don't burn someone's house down and then ask for it nicely," he said. "Tell your boss my answer's no." The man smiled faintly as if he'd expected it. "Then I hope you're ready for what's coming next." And with that, he left. That night, John realized the real attack wouldn't come with fire or men on horseback, it would come with water. He woke to a strange sound, a faint hum beneath the earth. Grabbing a lantern, he stepped outside. Off in the distance, toward the northern edge of the property, torches were darting through the dark. He met up with Silas, who had heard the same thing. Together, they discovered 4 men digging a trench, working to reroute the underground stream that fed John's wells. If they finished, the ranch would be dry in a matter of weeks. There was no time to lose. The narrator, careful not to drown the tale in violence, chooses a rhythm of resistance without blood. John didn't reach for a gun. He grabbed a shovel. He ran to wake the neighbors. Fernandez arrived with his oxen Dorothy with water buckets, Elias with rope. Together they collapsed the trench the intruders had started. There were scuffles. People fell in the mud. Shouts cut through the air. Overwhelmed, the hired men fled into the dark. The earth, as if remembering who it belonged to, seemed to heal with every swing of a shovel. The water returned to its path, whispering like a vow. At sunrise, Hallen understood he couldn't win against a town that had opened its eyes. As for Ward, he found himself abandoned. His men no longer followed him. His store sat empty. Father Graham wouldn't even nod at him in the street. Someone had painted a message on his door. Credit denied by conscience. That kind of punishment, slower than bullets, was lethal to a man who lived by appearances. Ward began to pack his things. But like any good Western, the story needed emotional closure. Every character still had one last truth to speak. One afternoon, Emma found Elias standing by the corral watching Ruth try to feed a horse far too much hay. "I'm leaving with my mother," he said. "We're heading to another valley. I don't want to spend my life hiding from Ward or from myself." Emma gave him a look of quiet gratitude. "Thank you for warning us that night. You might not know it, but you saved more than just lives. You reminded us that we can still trust strangers." Elias smiled, cheeks turning red. "I only did what was right." The narrator lets first love linger as a quiet possibility. No heavy promises, just the trace of something new. Lucy, on her end, went up to the attic with John. "I want to read more about Clara," she said. "I want to know the woman who trusted Mom and you." John handed her the journal. Clara was strong and kind. "You've got some of that in you, the way you listen before you speak." Lucy rested her head on his shoulder. "Dad," she said for the first time so softly, it was barely more than a breath. John closed his eyes for a moment, as if accepting a gift he never expected. "I'll be here," he answered. Ruth, who had seen everything as a dangerous game, began to fear the dark. Dorothy helped her sleep with stories about stars that watched over children. One night, John found her crying in bed. "I dreamed the fire came back," she said, eyes wide. "Fire's foolish," John replied, wrapping her in a blanket. "It only knows how to rise. But we know how to duck, hide, think. That's how we won." The narrator gives children the simple wisdom that heals. Only Ward remained. He returned one last time, thinner beard unkempt, carrying a small bag. He knocked on John's door at dusk when the shadows were long and pride was small. "I came to ask something," he said, avoiding eye contact. "Let me spend the night on your land. I'm leaving the valley tomorrow. No one will rent me a room. No one will sell me bread." John studied him for a long moment. The man who had tried to burn down his home, take the girls, and drain his land, now stood trembling like a dog caught in a storm. The narrator knows that the protagonist's heart was a battlefield where justice and mercy fought in silence. John opened the door. "You'll sleep in the shed, eat what there is, and be gone by sunrise, Ward." The man nodded, humiliated. That night, as wind whispered through the cracks, Ward wept. No one saw him, but the narrator did. He didn't cry out of regret, but because he'd fallen. Still, sometimes hitting the dirt opens cracks where the light slips in. At dawn, he left a note on the kitchen table. It was a half-written confession without excuses. "Madeline owed me. I made the debt impossible. I burned her barn. I tried to take what wasn't mine. If this is ever read, let it be known that I failed." The signature was shaky. John read it and didn't know whether to feel relieved or more enraged. He placed the paper in the attic with the rest. He didn't show it to the town. He preferred that Ward's punishment remain in people's memories, not his final words. Ward left with the sun at his back. No one saw him off. Days later, a letter arrived from Dry Creek. The newspaper had run a second piece telling the story of how a valley had stood together and how a man named John Miller had opened his home to 3 girls in the snow. There was no mention of bloodlines, no secrets, no fires, only community. Father Graham read the article aloud during Sunday service. For once, the chapel filled with applause. Time slow but certain brought spring. Green shoots pushed through the stubborn earth and wildflowers speckled the land around the newly rebuilt barn. The stream flowed clean and clear as if it had never been threatened. John watched the girls running in the grass, heard the cows lowing, laughed when Ruth fell face first into a mud puddle, and came up grinning with dirt from nose to chin. Emma Calmer now studied reading with Dorothy and helped Fernandez with the books. Lucy planted flowers near the graves of Clara and Madeline, who now shared the same resting place beneath the old elm, because sometimes memory needs to be brought together too. One late summer day, Emma approached John with a decision heavy on her lips. "I want to take your name," she said, "not to forget Madeline, but so no one ever tells me again that I don't belong. I want to be Emma Miller." "May I?" John felt the world stop for a breath. "Of course," he replied, smiling a smile they hadn't seen on him before. The narrator who appreciates endings sealed by action smiles too. Lucy, quieter, still held on to the silver locket. Sometimes she opened it to look at the photo and silently remind her mother that the promise had been kept. One evening she brought John a folded piece of paper. "It's a letter for Mom," she said. "I don't know where to send it." John read it. It was a note about life at the ranch, what she'd learned, what still scared her, what she'd grown to love. "You don't send it," he told her. "You keep it here." He pointed to his chest. Lucy did the same. That simple gesture sealed the bond between what was lost and what remained. The final thread still dangling was the name on the burned paper, Hallen. The trader never returned, but months later, he sent a messenger with a polite message. "I am withdrawing my business from the valley. There is no profit where reputation fails." Before leaving, the messenger quietly told John that Hallen had sent his regards. He said you're the first man to beat him without firing a shot. He'll remember your name. John wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a distant threat. He decided not to dwell on it. There were cows to move a roof to repair, and girls to raise. The narrator, ever patient and all-seeing, watches the final scene unfold. A golden afternoon, fields of wheat rippling in the breeze, and the new barn gleaming in the light. John sits on the porch, sharpening a small knife as laughter fills the air. Emma is teaching Ruth to ride a pony. Lucy waters the garden. Dorothy arrives with fresh bread and honey. Silas spins a tall tale about giant wolves being scared off by a sheep. Fernandez brings a folded newspaper with city news that matters less than it used to. Father Graham stops by not to preach, just to try the bread. John looks up and for a fleeting moment sees 3 figures standing at the doorway. Clara with her gentle smile, Madeline eyes steady and strong, and his younger self paralyzed by choice. None of them speaks, but the message is clear. The promise was kept. 3 girls arrived saying they had nowhere to go, and he had answered, "Then you're home." That home now had shape, scent, laughter, and shared silences. There was no court, no verdict, no papers stamped by a judge. What there was community social reckoning, forgiveness measured, and the exile of those who deserved it. Justice here, like in much of the West, looked more like meeting someone's eyes than swinging a gavel. Ward was gone. Hallen had withdrawn. The names that once caused pain were now seeds planted in the past. The narrator slowly dims his lantern. The story ends where it began, with a door opening into the cold and a voice saying, "Then you're home." Only this time, there is no snow, only the warmth of summer and the quiet certainty that when winter comes again, there will be more hands ready to light the fire. Hey friend, if you've made it all the way here, first off, thank you. I know this was a long story, but honestly, it's one of those that lingers in your chest long after the last line is read. This is the kind of story that reminds me why I love storytelling so much. It's not just about drama or plot twists, it's about heart, about choices, and about what it truly means to be family. What hit me the most is how justice in this story didn't come from a courtroom or a sheriff's badge. It came from community, from people standing up for each other when no one else would. It's a reminder that real power isn't in money or land or fear, it's in kindness, in keeping promises, and in the quiet strength of doing the right thing even when it's hard. John's journey from a man grieving and isolated to someone who builds a home for 3 girls is the emotional spine of the story. He doesn't save them because he's perfect. He saves them because he chooses to. And that's the biggest lesson here. Love isn't just about blood. It's about showing up again and again, even when it's messy, especially when it's hard. And Emma, Lucy, Rose. They each show us different kinds of courage. The kind that grows in silence, in fear, in muddy boots and broken barns. The kind of courage that feels real. So now I'd love to hear from you. What part stuck with you most? Did you see yourself in any of these characters? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story meant something to you too, maybe share it with someone who needs a little reminder that family isn't always about where you come from. It's about who stays. See you in the next one.